Thank you very much for being here. And it's a pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Maria Opfermann. She's a postdoctoral researcher and lecturer at the University of Wuppertal in Germany. Her activities are focused on multimedia learning, self-regulation, and of course, cognitive load. She has contributed to research on cognitive load theory, measurements specifically when cognitive load should be assessed, generative learning activities, and also the role of pictures for learning. As part of the elementary school department, she's interested in researching ways to optimize learning and cognitive load theory for young learners. She will present today the keynote From Childhood to Youth. How can we support our juniors in enjoying and self-regulating their learning? Welcome, Maria.
Muchas gracias.
We can put it here.
At least one in the audience know what this means. Right, Ferdi, you know that guy? So I'm not superstitious. It's a seductive detail. I'm going to talk about that one in actually the second presentation. So the first one, I hope I'll open the correct one. Yes, will be the keynote presentation. And yeah, thank you again for the very warm welcome, every one of you. I think I speak for all of us to say it's a great pleasure, a great honor to be here. And really exciting to be in South America. So thank you again. It's interesting because in the welcome notes, you also just talked about COVID and how schools in Chile were affected by COVID, the closures and stuff like that. And that is actually something I would like to start my presentation with. I thought about it for a while. I will put a focus on generative learning activities and special role of drawing for children's learning, but I will start with pandemic-related learning deficits, learning gaps, and how we can, well, at least reduce them. And you will see that it's got to do something with generative learning activities anyway, because children spontaneously did a lot of drawings, which was very interesting, but I'll come to that later on. So actually my keynote, and I will show that to you in a second, will consist of two bigger parts: the pandemic-related deficits and how we can work on them, and then in a more general way, not reducing deficits, but using generative activities, using drawing as an activity to help children learn better in a very general way. So children also without learning deficits. Well, to start off, I'm just very, very quickly go through a few numbers. I think you've all read them during COVID. I think you are all very aware of the problems that COVID posed on education. And for instance, UNICEF, like in this year, talked about a nearly insurmountable education loss. And just to present you a few numbers, what this means. In low and middle income countries, up to 70%, and I think that's a number that is, well, I can't even say how dramatic I find it, 70% of 10-year-old children, so that's primary school age, are unable to read or understand simple texts. That's really dramatic. Personally, I find the pre-pandemic numbers dramatic as well, so that's also more than half of the children. So here's some numbers from specific countries, and you see that not only low and middle income countries, but also richer countries like the US, post-COVID had up to 2/3 of children who are below basic competencies. In this case, the UNICEF reported on math competencies. To make matters even worse, we also see a dramatic picture even in so-called best-case scenarios. And in some publications, for instance, for the Netherlands, where actually, and I can confirm that, I worked there for a while, schools are comparably well equipped. There's good internet access everywhere, at schools, at homes. Schools are, I hope Fred doesn't scream now, but I think schools are pretty used to like computer-based teaching and online learning much more than in other countries. What these researchers, Ansel and co. Did was following 350,000 primary school kids aged 8 to 11 years with standardized testings in math, spelling, and reading, and they compared the differences between COVID testing dates to previous years. I will not go into detail with that, but if you have a look on the axis here, you see negative numbers, you see 0, and you see positive numbers. Positive numbers would mean there would be gains from pre-COVID to COVID. You see everything is in the area of negative numbers, so in every area and every comparison, education loss, and these are especially dramatic if you see like the income or the social backgrounds of the parents. The low and lowest, not surprisingly, have the highest gaps in learning. But what these authors also found and emphasize is that you can mitigate these effects by providing access to adaptive learning occasions, so to help children catching up besides standard school education. I'll come back to that in a second when I introduce our initiative to you. Just shortly, because I'm talking about a German initiative, what the situation was and still is in Germany. And that's very interesting. Also, you don't have to be able to read all this, but if you see those little green dots, I think you all see the green dots, right? That's where Germany stands compared to the OECD average. And what you see here is the situation whether like students, kids have a computer at home, whether they have internet access and stuff like that. And actually that looks pretty good. So where's the problem? And the problem is, and that also surprised me in the beginning, but not anymore now because I know the schools, they are below average regarding teachers' preparedness and schools' preparedness to provide online education. So even though they have internet access, teachers just aren't used to work with like Zoom or something like that, and they are used to providing everything on paper, and so they were completely overwhelmed with that situation, and that led to the dramatic losses. And what the OECD concludes is that self-directed learning, and COVID required a lot of self-directed learning from all ages and teachers as well as students. It's possible, but not without support. And just at this support, Germany is below average. So that's very dramatic. And to finish that little overview, this does not only include the like performance and learning variables, but also affective variables. And these are just a few examples. So you see that throughout the whole world, we have those problems related to COVID. They are related to performance, they are related to motivation, they are related to cognitive load when children are overwhelmed with the requirements that distance learning puts on them. And they are also related, and I can confirm that from our work with primary school children, especially to self-concept with regard to abilities that children have. So that's the situation we start, or I want to start with, very, very quickly. And the question is how we can help children, and of course older students. So I will try to talk a lot about children, but secondary school and students might be similar. How can we help them? Like getting back to track, enjoying their learning, having better performance, and so on. And I will talk about two bigger topics for the remainder of this session. The first topic is an initiative that we started in, and it's funny because I was just introduced, and I still think that the speaking out Wuppertal, which is a German city, sounds very fun in English. So that's an initiative we started in Wuppertal to help children who had or still have pandemic-related learning deficits. And it's an acronym. So in Germany, it means Fördern und Nachhilfe, and that's translated like supporting and tutoring. And I'm going to talk about that and whether we are successful with helping children. And then I will kind of lead over to a special focus on generative learning activities and especially drawing. And it's interesting because we have Detlef, one kind of pioneer in the drawing research area with us today. So drawing has been proven to work as a generative activity for learning success and so on. It has not been investigated that exhaustively with children, which is interesting because, oops, I'm sorry, all of you know children or have children, and you know that drawing is one of the favorite activities. So whatever a child does, give him a pen, and that child will start drawing. So the question is whether we can make use of that. And I'll do a little spoiler, but I still hope that you will follow me for the rest of the session. Yes, it works. So both the intensive initiative as well as letting children draw, to say very shortly, appear to be suitable to increase motivation of children, optimize their cognitive load, so kind of reduce the overloading, induce self-regulatory competencies. And with induce, I mean like just the beginning. So it will not be enough, but it can be a start. And so in the end, that's all meant to enhance children's learning. And I will start with telling you a bit about that initiative, the FUN project. And actually, yeah, it was and it is still fun in the original English way. We did this project in Wuppertal only, and to give you a short impression, German audience knows it, and it's one of the larger German cities. And what large means in Germany is like 350,000 inhabitants, and about 13,000 of them are primary school kids. And this number is important in a second, because what we did is, at the beginning of 2021, we contacted all primary schools in the city and asked them, well, kind of, do you have children who have COVID-related, pandemic-related learning deficits? Well, maybe that would be a stupid question, but of course, officially, we would ask that first. And then we asked them to give us the number of children that they think have severe learning deficits and they think need extra support besides schooling. And on top of that, we asked how many of these children come from families that would not be able to pay for additional learning support themselves. That will also be important in a second. Yeah, what do you think? Because when we asked those schools, when we called them and wrote to them, of course we had to estimate a number, what they would answer. What would you guess? How many children were named? What was the number? 13,000 primary school children, and we asked them to name us the children with severe learning deficits from poor families. Let's say it like this very shortly. What would you guess? 5,000 or 500? 5 children. Okay. you know that Wuppertal is such a privileged city, right? Now, actually, the funny thing is, the truth lies in between 5 and 3,000. So I was overwhelmed. It was at the first reply was more than 1,300 children, and these were only the children whose parents did not have enough money, and those were only the children who could at least speak some German. So this did not include children like refugees, children who do not speak German sufficiently yet. If we add those, it would about double the number, and then it would be like 20% of children who have extremely severe learning deficits. That's 1/5 of all children for whom normal schooling would not be enough. And I personally, I was really surprised and overwhelmed. My personal guess to add on this was 300. So I thought, yeah, maybe they answer with 300. The thing is, 1,300 was, of course, way too much. Our idea was to provide these children with extra support with the help of our primary school teacher students. Even before COVID, part of their regular curriculum, my God, part of the courses they have to attend, I'm still in jet lag, sorry, is a 2-semester course on individual adaptive tutoring. So they really learn how to work with children, how to help them to get better. They learn that anyway. And so we thought, okay, let's make use of it and put these students to those schools. So the courses are, first semester it's a theoretical part, and in the theoretical part, for instance, in my courses they learn about theories and research on the development of very, very basic skills like reading, writing, and math. Also the importance of precursor skills like for reading phonological awareness, which is something very important. And in my course, I also focus on the role of motivation and specifically cognitive load, which is not very popular in primary school teaching. So that's something like my special focus. So students who are interested know they can come to my course. They also learned something about assessment. So that includes ways of assessing learning gaps with standardized testing, but also with just like working with children normally. But also, of course, because that's going to be important in a minute, assessing learning gains. So when do I see that an initiative is successful? And you can all think about it. And maybe, of course, the first thing would be like, I want to improve children's reading. Then, of course, first point would be they read better or faster, make less mistakes afterwards. But maybe a successful initiative would already be, maybe they don't improve their reading that dramatically in such a short amount of time, but get a higher self-concept, which would mean that in the future they try reading themselves or so. So that's what we discussed. Then, of course, they learned about ways to support learning, ways to focus interventions on deficits that are existent in the children they get to know. And finally, evaluation. That's pretty much what I just mentioned. Indicators of learning success besides mere performance gains. So, can we talk of learning success if motivation increases, self-concept increases, and for this conference, of course, of special interest, cognitive load? So that's everything we work with in the first semester. And actually, at this point of time, well, not now, it's evening now, but today I would give this course actually, if I were in Wuppertal. And so what we did now was kind of an online tutorial. Just to give you an impression, we of course couldn't care for all these 1,300 kids. There were way too many. So in the first phase, we asked the schools to select 180 children. And we decided for third graders. The reason for that was they were shortly before coming into fourth grade, and fourth grade is in Germany the grade before they come to secondary school. So just to enhance the transition or prepare them for the transition or increase their chances to go to a better school, we focused on that third grade. At the moment we do have about 400 children that are being supported by 150 students. These sessions, these interventions, take place after the regular lessons at school, at primary schools. So children go to school until 12, then have lunch, and then go to the intervention for another 90 minutes. And that takes place, depending on the school, for 1 or 2 days in a week. So not every day, that would be too much, that would be overwhelming. So 1 or 2 days a week, 90 minutes additional intervention. Our students can work alone or in tandem teams, and they work with a maximum of 6 children, so very, very small groups. These children, as I just said, have been assigned by the schools. Most of them, not surprisingly, have learning gaps in all areas. So they cannot really read, then of course they cannot really write, and they do have problems in math as well. In cooperation with the schools, we decided in the intervention to focus on one area only. So to foster and to support at least one area like reading, very intensively instead of trying to support all of the areas for just a little bit. And I can, well, that's also a little spoiler. Most, I would say like about 70% of the intervention so far focused on reading, because that's the basic competency. If you cannot read, you will not be able to write. And if you cannot read, you will not be able to learn calculating because you don't understand, for instance, the tasks that are given to you, right? So that's the main focus of the intervention. As this was an idea to give really adaptive support. So see each child, see what each child, or see the learning deficits of each child. So the intervention itself was not a standardized or uniform procedure. It was decided by the students after assessment what kind of learning materials, what kind of intervention materials they would use. We had some established intervention materials, but the students also developed a lot by themselves. And you see an example here, which is a huge amount. It's really like a huge suitcase, and all of you who just came to Chile by flights know what a huge suitcase is. So they developed a huge suitcase with, do you also call it station learning in English? Do you know what Stationenlernen is? So if it's not that translation, I'm sorry, I forgot to look it up. You have several tasks and several interventions, like simple reading practicing or a game, I can show it here, where you throw dice, and for the dice you throw, you read out the sentences. And children could choose, and that's the idea of station learning, with which of these they start. So they were like, in this case, the students developed 12 stations, 12 kinds of interventions, and all of them were done, but children could freely choose which of them they would like to start with. All of them were focused on reading. So just to give you an impression with this dice throwing thing, a child throws a dice and then has, for instance, a 5. Let's say that's here, the owl, and a 1. That would be in English, is jumping in the grass. And the child would build that sentence and say, okay, the owl is jumping in the grass. And then they would have to say whether that sentence makes sense or whether it's a funny sentence. For children, that was a very funny, indeed, way of kind of reading and trying to make sense of the sentences. But that's only one example. We had a lot of other very nice ideas, like building up a room. And you see all the objects here. What you don't really see is that the objects had labels with words, so the children had to read the words to follow the instruction, like put the bed beside the plant or something like this. So it was kind of a game-like to keep children motivated. But we also had, going through that quickly, very classical reading interventions. So children read out texts, and we assessed like the reading speed, the mistakes they made, and so on. But also for these classical reading interventions, children were able to choose what kind of text they would like to read. So we have a lot of nice children's books, and of course very popular is soccer or like space or animals of the ocean, and so on and so on. So all of this was done adaptively, but I know you're all researchers and you want to have some like hard things. What we did was standardized testing whenever it was possible, like pre and post to the interventions. We did, in the case of reading support, standardized reading tests, and those of you who are from Germany know the Alpha reading test. It's a widely used one. What you see here is 2 parts of that test, just very quickly. It's word comprehension, so children see a picture. That is, for instance, a house. And they have to mark the word that says house. And depending on the item, that can be a bit more difficult and a bit less difficult. For instance, we have 2 words here. Haus, that's the German word. And we have the word Haut, that's got almost the same letters except the last one. So that's something that children need to read to be able to find the correct words. It's the same for sentence comprehension. I'm not going into that in detail, but what we did was test sentence and word comprehension before reading intervention and afterwards. And what we also did was during the intervention, or what our students did mostly because they did this, during the intervention in each session, like measure reading speed of children or the mistakes those children make, or also, I'm going to show you in a minute, motivation and of course cognitive load if they were my students. So just very quickly, can we talk of a successful initiative? And I have to say so far, because this initiative goes on. We do that continuously, and the schools asked us to continue even now after, well, it's not after COVID, but even now that things seems to get a little better, because obviously it really helps children improving. So I would say yes, we can, and just some examples of the improvement. For instance, the development of reading and literacy skills with the standardized test that you just saw. Within an 11-week intervention with 2 sessions each week, we find that word comprehension improves, sentence comprehension improves, reading speed for words as well as for sentences improves. Nevertheless, if you see, like, for instance, that part, oh, I should have added that this is the percentage of correctly read or correctly understood. 20% to, I think it's 28%, it's still, well, 28% read correctly is still very low, right? But it's an improvement. So that was, well, I would not say surprising, because of course that's exactly what we wanted, but it's very clear. So that, I was very happy about that. And I'm also show you a few diagrams where you see what we assessed during the intervention. And I just talked about reading speed and mistakes, and I was actually really surprised. And that's the average number of mistakes that children made when reading short text of about 300 words. And all those children, severe learning deficits, that's why they got the extra intervention, they started with an average of 25 mistakes per 300 words, and that's really much. That's really much. 25 mistakes and 300 words is not even half a page. So that's a lot of mistakes, and in the end, they made about 10 mistakes. That's still a lot, but that's a dramatic improve. And what I also found very nice is the development of motivation and cognitive load. And I'm just showing you 2 examples. So the items we assessed during learning, and that was also pretty much standardized between the interventions. If the children received reading support, they answered 4 questions during the support. Reading today was fun. Reading today was interesting. Reading today was difficult, so perceived difficulty, and self-concept, I was good at reading today. I'm just showing you 2 of these graphs. Reading motivation, it's not as nice as the mistakes results, but you see that reading motivation increases on average throughout the sessions. What is interesting in this case, the maximum score could be 6, right? Children at the end of the intervention, on average, did not fully enjoy reading, but at least they enjoyed it much more than at the beginning, so, right? And now the graph I'm showing you at this slide is a bit nicer again. The perceived difficulty of reading decreased. Still, it started with, on average, like 5.2, and in the end we're at, I think, 3.2. So still it's a comparably high amount of cognitive load on average of perceived difficulty, but it's a steady decrease, and that's what we want to continue. So summing this part up, the initiative so far, I would call it successful. These focused interventions that were really developed adaptively for each child, for each small group of children, obviously can help children to decrease learning gaps, my God. Just a short remark. We did standardized testing, but of course the schools afterwards also told us whether the children could catch up in the normal lessons. And that also looked quite good for the post-intervention phase. I will in a second talk about follow-up, and then the situation does not look that nice anymore. But immediate intervention can help decrease learning gains, the motivation of children, their self-concept increased, which I think is really great because that's a good basis for them to continue learning by themselves if they suddenly start to like reading. I personally took part in the interventions in the first phase, so I also taught children. And they really appreciated this extra form of support. Some of them really asked whether they might come again in the next round. And I personally, I must say, I was surprised, but if I had I was at school, and if I would have been required to go to extra lessons twice a week after school, that wouldn't have been very motivating for me. But obviously, these children appreciated that it helps them getting better. So that was really cool. But, and that's a point that I'm still, not struggling with. So we obviously could help catching up on deficits. But when this support, the intervention ended, like after 11 up to 20 weeks, depending on frequency of support, it might be difficult for the children to keep that level up. And I have two examples, and Detlef might remember that, first graph. When I was still working in Essen, we did an intervention regarding basic math competencies in primary schools. And what you see here, you just have to look at the blue graph. The math training helped children with deficits catching up to their normally developed peers very, very quickly. But when the intervention ended, we did a follow-up test, I think it was 3 months afterwards, 3 months later, that had dramatically dropped again. And the same that was primary school, and I just talked to Ferdi last week, that was 5th grade, so it's not primary school anymore, but very similar. I think you also, but Ferdi, please scream if I do say it incorrectly. You also have to look at the blue graph here. That was an intervention on self-regulatory competencies, and you see here, pre-test, post-test, it goes up, but then in the follow-up, if the support doesn't continue, it goes down again. So what I conclude here at this point is if you have children, and we talk about children with deficits who need extra support, the extra support can help, but it cannot help catching up on something in like 20 weeks and then everything is perfect and they get along on their own. It should actually continue. And of course, that's a question of organization and money and stuff like this. What is interesting, and that might also be interesting for all of you, but maybe also for Ferdi especially, because I know he's very interested in self-regulation. With regard to the children that we supported at this age, like 3rd and 2nd graded, they had such massive learning deficits. They could not read. They were unable to calculate like 2 + 7. So in these interventions, we did not give any explicit instructions for self-regulated learning. So we did more of a directed learning because the priority was on teaching these very basic skills first. But kind of an implicit support might have been given. Because, for instance, remember that station learning. Children were able to choose with which of the tasks they start. So they might have started to reflect on what is interesting, what helps them most, what fits their current abilities most. So that might have been a good starting point for implicit support of self-regulation. And that's also a bit of what we observed. What for me personally was very interesting, but also very fun to observe in the groups I worked with, was that children really started to reflect not only on their, but also on their peers' learning. So as soon as they got better and others got not, because of course the speed of the development is different, they started to help. They started like correcting them, like, oh, that's not right, or you have to do it like this, or a classical self-regulatory competition. Oh, you have to think again, or you have to look at that again. And that's so funny if like 9-year-old children help each other like this. What I also found very interesting is that children reported they would practice at home so they would not forget what they have learned. So a very openly communicated competency. And this is very funny because that leads me over to the second part of this talk. Indeed, and that's very fun, we recognized all the children drawing during the intervention. So they worked with texts, they worked with like sheets of calculations and stuff like this. And whenever they had something to work with and a pen, many of them would draw. Of course, most of those drawings, or not most of those, no, but some of these drawings are just like smileys or whatever. But some of them were instructional. And so that brings me to the second part of this little talk. And I would like to talk about the benefit of drawing for, I made brackets, children's learning. The benefits of drawing for learning in general have been proven already. And thanks to Detlef, and we just talked about it before the conference started. Not sure whether you are familiar with, who of you has seen this picture already? Okay, great. That, then I can tell you, that's kind of how it all started. You see another picture, and that is actually a good picture that shows comprehension, and I'll explain to you why in a minute. These two pictures are pictures made by my niece. She's started a primary school in September, so she's turning, oh my God, my brother will kill me. She's turning 7 in December. So she's just started, and that's a classical children's drawing, no? Like every child does. And that's a drawing she did when at primary school the teacher talked about animals and asked the children, so kind of what also Detlef observed, the teacher asked them to draw the animals she just talked about. And in this case, she was talking about a rhino, and my niece didn't write rhino, so that's, that's the writing of the teacher, but she drew, and I actually think that's a very good picture. I was really surprised. So that reflects comprehension of the description, right? Obviously, children like to draw, and we will have a look on whether it's beneficial. I'm going through that very quickly. So, of course, there should be not only the fact that children like to draw, but the question is, do we have a theoretical background that can explain why it's beneficial? And, well, I will not let you raise your hands because I assume many of you are familiar with this scheme. That's the multimedia theory of Mayer. And basically it says words and pictures are better than words alone because our working memory has a limited capacity. So if you put pictures or add pictures to words, you make use of both channels, and that is beneficial for learning. And that also might apply to drawings instead of provided pictures, and that's what Detlef proved in his work. The generative drawing principle that says that people learn better from. You say science text, I put the science in brackets because if I talk about the children, then of course it's not the science that you researched, but people learn better from science texts when they are asked to draw illustrations representing the main ideas of the text, instead of being provided with pictures. And there have been a lot of thoughts on this. Also some groundbreaking research and theory was made by Van Meter, and you might also know her. And basically what she adds on top of what I just said is that if you instruct somebody to draw, it's beneficial for learning, because if I would kind of instruct you to draw what I'm talking about, it would in a best case make you follow me more concentrated, try to think about what's relevant. Maybe in the end you say, oh, there was nothing relevant that I could have drawn, but then you would have reflected as well. Drawing makes people apply additional learning strategies, of course assume that they are known for these learners. And I'm also coming back to that in a second, because that's also what one of Detlef's PhD students found. And drawing, as a consequence, leads to a higher degree of self-monitoring and self-regulation. Just to summarize very quickly, I read a text. If I am asked, or if I want to draw something from this text, I need to understand what's important in the text and what's, for instance, just an irrelevant and seductive detail. So if you want to understand what my keynote is about, you might better follow the text instead of looking at my gestures or looking at that seductive detail, right? Okay. So what we also found, and that's, by the way, the second picture from where it and how it all started. What we found, or what especially Detlef found in the beginning, is that drawing alone, or the mere instruction for drawing, is not enough. So that picture is from the same text than the picture you saw on the first slide where I asked, is anyone familiar? And the instruction was to read a text about bats and how they orient themselves with, now I have, Detlef, we have looked up the translation, I have forgot it. It was something with sonic sound waves, not sound waves. Ultrasonic waves, right? What bats do. So bats in the dark, if you have ever been somewhere where bats are and they fly around your head, they would not crash against you because they don't see you, but they orient themselves. So that was what the text was about. And the children who read the text started drawing, and that was, if I remember correctly, also spontaneous drawing. So they were, in that case, not instructed. And one drawing was this. That's a very, very nice bat indeed. Good picture. But actually, it's not a picture that reflects the ideas of the text. And let's see whether I can go back very, that, well, that you cannot even see that it's a bat, but you see that the idea has been understood. So that is what it started with. So the question is, if you instruct children to draw, what makes a drawing a good drawing? When does it help learning? And I'm just going very quickly for the remainder of this talk through the role of instructional support, the role of learner characteristics and learner behavior, and then go back to instructed versus, like you see here, spontaneous drawing. That's also very interesting, especially for children. So the role of instructional support in drawing has focused a lot on the effectiveness of drawing prompts. As you just heard, the instruction to draw alone might overload learners, right? So it might be nice to give them some help so that the drawing as a process does not impose cognitive load on top of trying to understand the text, right? And what Detlef does, or did, or still does, I think you're still doing some research, or what Detlef did in a lot of studies, was investigating the effectiveness of drawing prompts like backgrounds and toolbars. So what we found here is a text on the surface tension of water and transits, comparing a text with a text provided with a drawing background, a text provided with a toolbar. You don't see the details, but it's not relevant. It's just like the relevant elements were provided. You were instructed to draw. You had the elements, so you could concentrate on drawing, so you could see whether you have understood the connections, the relations, and stuff like that. And of course, there was a condition that included all. And basically, what we found in that case was that the text-only condition and the text plus drawing background condition were significantly worse than the two conditions with the toolbar. So that seems to be a really important help. Picturing elements, because the elements, they represent the main ideas of the text. So you are given the main ideas, but you still have to draw them. That's, I think, a very good start for reading a scientific text. And, well, not surprising, drawing without any support is not beneficial. And that is what we also investigated in a bit of another way at primary schools. So what we did this year, at the beginning of this year, was looking at drawing and the effectiveness and supporting drawings in real drawing lessons. So it was about drawing. And what I thought was very interesting, these were first grade children, so very, very young children. There were 40 children, 2 classes, we compared them, and they were required to draw different objects. And since Chris just told about the weather outside, I thought, okay, let's show you these pictures of sundaes, ice creams with cones and cups and everything. And what you see here is actually some kind of toolbar. You see it more detailed later on. And what we did in this case, we just compared 2 conditions. The children were asked to draw ice cream sundaes of their choice. And in one condition, they should choose freely or could choose freely between the type of pen and paintbrush and color. So they were completely free in their decisions. And in the other condition, they were given extra supports beforehand. So we explained to them, or the student explained to them, the advantages of crayons, of watercolors, and I wanted to look that up before the keynote. Those, well, colored pens that are not crayons. Filzstift. The Germans. Well, like fine liners, you know. Texture? Yeah, it's not texture, but it's that type of pen. So another type of pen, let's say, like, maybe you see it here in the picture. So the advantages and disadvantages, for instance, that if you paint with crayons, you can erase what you have painted again. If you paint with watercolors, it's not that easy to erase. Watercolors are more expressive, but on the other hand, if you don't take care, you just spread it everywhere, and that can't happen with crayons, and so on and so on. The whole thing looked like this in the class with the support condition. So you had kind of a toolbar here that showed several elements. You had the support here. And let me add, I just said that these were first-class children. And of course, they weren't required to read it on their own. It was explained to them by the teacher, and then it was on the wall for the rest of the hour. Yeah? Okay. And what we found, what we assessed first very quickly with 4 items afterwards: enjoyment of the drawing lesson, then cognitive load, perceived difficulty of the drawing activity, perceived difficulty of the choice between the different pens, and also interest and perceived usefulness. Since these were first-class children, we assessed this on a smiley and emoji scale. And what we found very quickly, just have a look at the time, indeed, and for me that was really, really surprising, but of course it's very nice results. What you see here, the blue bars are the children who received explanations beforehand, and the yellow bars, the children who did not receive explanations. Children with explanations had less difficulty deciding which pen, which color they would use. They indicated that drawing was less difficult, and that was really surprising, they also had more fun drawing. I would have assumed that the motivation item would not make any difference, but they had more fun drawing. That was really interesting. And for those children who received the support, we had this extra question on perceived helpfulness of the explanations, and that was also rated with a mean score of 5 on a scale from 1 to 6. So obviously that worked very well. But of course the question is, and these are the last few slides, whether this works equally for all learners, right? And so just very quickly on the role of learner characteristics and learner behavior. They are important as well. And again, let me first cite the work that I just mentioned of Detlef. What they investigated in this study, or I was part of this, so what we investigated, was whether learners with, for instance, different levels of prior knowledge differ in how they read a text, how they attend to the provided toolbar, how they look at the drawings while they draw, and so on and so on. And in the end, of course, because that's what we all want to do research on, in their learning success. We investigated, I'm not sure whether you can really see it, with eye tracking. So the learners had eye tracking glasses on, so you could really see where they looked at. And what we found very quickly, indeed, you see red and blue lines. I won't go into detail with that, but you see that there are differences between how learners with different levels of prior knowledge attend to text, switch between text and pictures, and so on. And what we also found, and I think that's a major aspect of learning, is that the prior knowledge that somebody has affects the quality of the drawing. So the quality of the drawing means, does this drawing reflect whether you really understood what you read, right? And that quality, again, not surprisingly, also affects post-test performance. So what we can take home from this is, induce prior knowledge first, when children don't have any, before you let them like start drawing on their own, and that might help. So, yeah, and that's really like the last 2 slides, what Detlef also found is that besides drawing, and that was also very interesting, is that even if they are not instructed to, learners applied additional strategies. And you all might know that if you read an article, something like this, you either highlight or you take notes on the side or make like marks on that to read again afterwards or to summarize. And you also might remember at the very beginning when you started university or were still at school. That was for me when I started university and I read my text, and it was at a time where there was no internet, no Google. Yes, there was a time. And when I highlighted my text, it sometimes ended up with the whole text being yellow. Yeah. That's the second last slide. And that's interesting that these learners applied those strategies. So the question is, how about if learners, and in this case children, apply strategies like drawing spontaneously? You have seen that in Detlef's case with the bat. And now I'll come back in the very end to primary school children again. The starting point were our studies on decorative pictures, and I can make that very short because after the coffee break you will see me again with my research talk. We investigated the effectiveness of decorative pictures, and what we observed is, besides following the actual instruction, reading the text, looking at the picture, children spontaneously, like in Detlef's study, underlined parts of the text, made notes, and drew pictures of all kinds. And very quickly, the results, children who drew, at least partially or fully, I call them instructional pictures. So we analyzed the spontaneous drawings, and when they were just smileys, they were different categories than when they obviously had drawn something from the text. And these children really outperformed the children who did not draw or drew only decorative pictures on all performance measures. Same for children who took notes during learning, and for children who underlined, but that slightly missed significance. But that was a very interesting result. So what I would summarize at this, not at this point, that's really a summary, so then it's over. The benefits of drawing, obviously, are great. They do show up, even if learners, children, are not explicitly instructed to draw, because they like to draw. They appear across different domains, across different age groups, which is important for adult learners, for older learners, but also for children already. They do not seem to be simple multimedia effects, so it's not just about the picture and the text, it's about more the generative activity. And they are kind of motivating for children. So in my case, what I would recommend for schools in general, but especially for primary schools, let children draw. So if they learn, and if you teach them something, or if they have to read a text and they make drawings, do not interrupt them. Let them draw and see whether it helps, right? To avoid cognitive overload, if drawing is part of the instruction, help them beforehand. Don't just say, okay, you can draw something, or you are expected to draw something. Help them. And try to at least induce other generative learning strategies, as children are obviously able to do so. And to finish off, to show that children are able to reflect on what they have learned, what they have seen, and make a drawing of that, I would like to close with a picture I just took 2 days ago. I was in the Museum of Human Rights, and for those of you who haven't been there, it's extremely moving, and you have a department there where you see children's drawings. from what they have experienced, from what they have read, from their parents' letters who are imprisoned. And that's a drawing of a 10-year-old child. And I'll close with that and say it really shows that a child is well able to understand, reflect, and draw. Thank you. I'm so sorry, I took too much time. I'll make that up with the other talk. That will be quicker.
You don't have to be sorry. Thanks very much, Maria, for your insightful presentation. We have a little present for you also.
Thank you. Thank you. Great.
And if you have 2 minutes to have some questions, we know that the coffee is waiting for us, but I think we can wait a little bit.
The coffee before.
You created the expectations, Maria. Well, just give me a minute that I have a mic.
You can also screen for all.
Maria, I wondered whether you noticed any children closing their eyes in the work that your teachers were doing with the students. So that's referred to in the literature gaze aversion, but it's got a lot in common with the imagination effect. Arthur Glenberg has done wonderful work involving physical manipulatives, including so that for me seems to be a really lovely example of a self-regulated strategy which would be very easy, and some children may already be doing it, very easy to include in such settings.
Well, that's a very, very good and interesting question. So a question whether children close their eyes. We didn't observe children closing their eyes, but I think that's due to what children are used to. And if they would close their eyes at their primary schools where they are expected to learn, the teacher would immediately say, pay attention. So they just don't dare. But it would be very interesting to do some research on that and ask them to close their eyes, try to imagine.
So either close their eyes or look away. So gaze aversion is often sort of looking up and so taking away from, it's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So geez, should I say everything I just said? You go ahead.
Yeah, the question is, so maybe you're on a... So I'll do it like this. Yeah, to whether children closed their eyes or just looked away in another direction. Well, we did not observe that, but I would completely agree with you that this would be very interesting to do research on. And I think children did not do it in our cases, also the not looking away, because especially those children with learning deficits, they are used from their classes that the teacher would immediately interrupt if they are doing something else than looking at their papers. Yeah, that's German, I'm so sorry to say. Yeah.
Thanks, Maria, for this presentation. And it's good to hear that drawing research is going on. My question is, we can have a look at least at two kinds of pictures, representational pictures,
yes,
or explanative pictures, and decorative. Okay. But my question is whether what kind of pictures are drawn by primary school children when they only draw representational picture. So what looks a Reno like? That is not a picture which represents understanding, yes, of something.
Yes, absolutely.
This bed, which was drawn by a child of, I think, 5th or 7th class, this picture shows that
yes,
this child has understood something.
Yes.
So what kind of pictures did you find
yes,
in your studies?
I did not make the distinction here, but it's indeed a very important distinction, not only to talk of instructional, but then representative and explanative. We actually found both, but of course representative pictures were a little more. But for instance, and I can say, I'm going to talk about that after the coffee break, in the studies I'm going to talk about next, and the starting point were the studies that we still did in Essen with the blood circulation thing. And we also observed children drawing, and sometimes these reflected understanding, so they did not only draw a heart or something like that, but for instance for blood circulation they drew little drops of blood standing in a circle and holding hands or something like this. And that reflects kind of a comprehension. But I would fully agree that it would be even more interesting to do research on that explicitly. So that could be interesting, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.